Hey there everybody, Mark Bates here. I thought I would do a fun little video today and show how to implement a whole kind of authentication workflow in Buffalo using Goth, which allows us to talk to OAuth and OAuth 2 providers. Goth provides just a staggering number of OAuth and OAuth 2 providers. Chances are, if you need one, it's there. Which is pretty awesome. And if there isn't, please provide one. Almost all of these are community driven, which is really, really exciting. Considering that when I first started Goth, I only kind of started with like GitHub and Facebook and Twitter, and the rest have just kind of come from everybody out there, and that's really amazing. But yeah, so I thought we would do create a Buffalo app and kind of show you how to do login, log out. We'll use Goth to do the authentication. We'll create some database tables. We'll show what it's like to put some stuff behind authentication. And yeah, it's going to be a little bit longer video than we usually do on this blog, which is usually just a couple minutes. So let's just dive right in. It's going to be fun. I've already created a brand new Buffalo application here called Coke. You're probably familiar with Coke if you've followed me, or Buffalo. It's my general purpose, breakable toy. So I've generated a new Buffalo app. There's honestly nothing exciting about this app here. I haven't done anything to it. But the first thing we're going to add right off the bat is Goth. Now there's a great generator for this here, and we can just pass it a list of providers we want to use. In this case, I'm just going to use the GitHub provider. So I could do Buffalo generate Goth and then the name of the providers, in this case GitHub. That's going to generate everything I need. So if we look at app.go, we'll start there. Go all the way down the bottom. We've added a couple lines to the application here, a group called /auth, and then off that is one for the provider, which will be using Gothic to handle that whole part of it. Gothic is a sub-package of Goth, which wraps up most of the usual authentication behavior of Goth. And then we're gonna have a callback for when we get, we go to GitHub, which is what's going to happen in this first stage here. Then when GitHub comes back, it's going to call our callback here. So if we open up auth.go, you can see here, well, why are we getting, app.sessionstore. Oh, okay, because we've got vendoring turned on here. I'm going to, get rid of vendoring for right now. There you go. And that should fix that. It's because we don't have Goth added to our vendor directory yet. That's the reason why. But we could have added it, but I just decided to turn it off. Now you can see here we've got our GitHub all set up. A couple things to note about this. You do need GitHub key and secret. You can go to GitHub and you can get those through the applications API section. I'm not going to go into that today. And this goes true for any of the OAuth providers, Twitter, Facebook, whatever. LinkedIn, you need keys and you need secrets and all that sort of fun stuff. One thing I will point out here is the hosts. So by default in Buffalo, your host is 127.0.0.1, and that's what the URL is going to be. If you get errors that tell you your URIs don't match or redirect you don't match, it's because the URL you're sending them is probably not the URL you set up in the application, in the, say, GitHub side. So you need to make sure those are absolutely matched correctly. You can either set an environment variable called host to do that, or when you're setting up your Buffalo application, you can set up host here to be whatever you want as part of your options. So back to the auth here. So we've set up some providers. We tell them Gothic what store to use, which is our session store, which is fantastic. And then we have our auth callback. Now this is where GitHub's going to come back to us, and we're going to do some fun stuff with it. So before we go and do that, let's go to our index template here. And I'm just going to delete everything that's on there. And I'm just going to do a very simple block of code. We're going to say if the current user, right? And we'll say hello current user, because we don't actually have a current user yet. And then we'll put a little else block in here. And there you go. And inside this else block, we will do /auth GitHub. This is where we're going to be able to do tell them to sign in. So please sign in. So the logic is pretty simple here. If there's a current user, we're going to greet the current user. Otherwise, we're going to ask them to log in. Pretty simple. So let's actually start up our application here. And if we go to 127.0, you can see we say, please sign in. And if I click sign in, it's going to take us through GitHub, and it's going to come back to our app. And we can see here we got a big JSON dump because that is what is in our auth.go. We're just going to dump the JSON. So that's cool. We've got that flow working. Again, I had already previously set up my GitHub application, and I have the keys in my environment. So make sure you do that. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can actually start doing something with the callback and with the user information we get from GitHub. So I'm going to create here a new model, right? Buffalo DB generate model called user, and user is going to have a name. It's going to have a provider, and it's going to have a provider ID. There we go. Create users. You can see we've got all the information here. We can add an index on this. And we will make this a multi-column index. Unique. True, there we go. So we've got a nice index on the provider and the provider ID. Now the provider is going to be GitHub, and the provider ID is going to be my ID from GitHub that's going to get returned. Now, this is a simple application where we're only using GitHub, so I really probably don't need provider. The provider ID alone is probably good enough so that when the person comes back, the user comes back to my application, I can look in the database and see if they already have an existing account, and if they do, I can just log them in. Otherwise, I need to create a new account. But I like this approach because this allows me to then later on add multiple providers, so you can create different accounts with those providers. So now we can do Buffalo DB migrate. And I have a syntax error probably in my add index. Yes, so there we go. That needs to be true. I was using plush syntax there. I apologize. Okay, so we have a database table now. And we have a nice user type here. Fantastic. So if we go back to our auth, now this is where things can start getting interesting. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to rename this Goth user to just be GU. And then down here, I'm going to start by first getting the transaction from the context. So here we go, and that is a pop connection. And then I'm going to build a basic query here, where I'm going to say where the provider equals and the provider ID equals, and from the GU I can get the provider and I can get the user ID from the GitHub, from the Goth user. So now what we want to do is we want to check and see whether that exists or not. Because if it exists, we're going to do one thing, and if it doesn't exist, we're going to do something else. But the first thing we're going to do is our error handling. So there's a problem, we're going to bail. Then we're going to say, okay, if it exists, we're going to log them in. Otherwise, we're going to create a new user. So now I can say we'll create, let's see here, yep, sorry, models user. So if it exists in the database, then we can say, find the first one of that. Again, if there's a problem, return the error. And if it doesn't exist, well, we're going to create it. So let's set some information on our user here. So we'll set the name equal to the GU name. And we'll set the provider equal to the GU provider. And let's see, the provider ID we'll set to the user ID. And then we could say validate and save, or we'll just do save in this case. And again, check our errors. So by now, down here, we should either have the user from the database or have created a new user and have that. So now what we can do is we can get the session here. And on the session, I'm going to set the current user ID. And I'm going to set that equal to the ID of the current user. Then I'm going to make sure to save the session and handle my errors. And finally, assuming all is good, I'm going to return c.redirect back to the home page. So we have one, nope, there we go. All of our compilation errors are good. Okay, so let's start up our application here and go back to our browser, go to 127, and hopefully, if this all works correctly, we should go back to localhost 3000, and it did. But that's not very exciting. Let's add a nice little flash message down here. Flash, we will add success here, and we'll say you have been logged in. There we go. So now sign in, come back, you have been logged in. But we still don't have the current user on the page, and that's okay, that's to be expected, because we haven't actually added that yet. So let's create, in our auth page here, a new piece of middleware, and we'll call this set current user. And what we're going to do is check c.session get here current user ID, and if the UID is not nil, then we're going to retrieve the user from the database. So we'll say models user here, and we'll get the get the transaction from the database, from the context rather. And actually we don't need where here, we can do first, or find rather, where we've got the UID. And again, handle our errors. And assuming we don't have any errors, we can set the current user onto the context. And then finally, of course, we want to call the next piece of middleware. So now we actually need to set this up in our application. So after the transaction middleware here, we will say app.use set current user. So assuming that all works correctly, we should already have a user in the session, but just to verify, we've logged in, and look at that! Hello, current user! Woohoo! Awesome! Very exciting! So we're getting there. Let's go back to our template now, and we can change current user to be current user.name. So if I were to just reload the page, I get hello Mark Bates. Awesome. Very exciting. Let's add the next step in this chain, which is to log out. So here I will say just /auth. How's that sound? And we'll delete that, but we'll set a data method to delete. There we go. So what we want is an endpoint called /auth, which responds to delete. So back in our Actions app here, on our auth, we can say delete, and then we'll give it a little callback here. We'll call it auth delete, or auth destroy. There we go. Now we just need to actually create our auth destroy. So let's do that now. We'll create a new function here, new Buffalo function called auth destroy. And this is going to be very simple. We're going to say session.clear. See session.save. Always making sure to save our session. And again, handling our errors. But assuming we've done things correctly, we could change our message here to you have been logged out. So if we refresh our page, there we go. We've got our logout link. You have been logged out. Please sign in. Fantastic. This is great. This is exactly the behavior that we wanted for our application. So now, before we wrap this up, let's see what it looks like to add authorization middleware on top of this. So you can go back here, and we'll generate a new resource. We'll call it widget, and widgets have a name. And Buffalo DB migrate. There we go. And we will start up our application now. So let's create another new piece of middleware here. We'll call it authorize. Oops, I've got a shortcut here there we go. Authorize. And we're just going to copy some of what's in this middleware here. And we're going to say if UUID is nil, then we're going to return c.redirect. Here we'll just do a redirect to the home page, and we'll add a c.flash, and we'll add a danger message that says you must be authorized to see that page. Okay, so pretty simple. If there is no current user ID in the session, then we're going to send them back to the home page, tell them that they have to be authorized to do what they want to do. So now what's kind of typical is you typically want to wrap like almost your whole application in this middleware. So one thing we obviously can do is, if we want here, is we could say when you do app.resource, that gives you a group, and on that group we can add some new middleware here. So we can add the authorized middleware. So that's, you can see I'm logged out here, but if I go to widgets, I must be logged in. If I sign in here, I'm signed in. If I go to widgets, now I can see widgets, right? We kind of expect that. So that works great for what we want to do. But what about authorizing the whole application, not just the widget's endpoint. I kind of want to authorize pretty much everything. So I'm going to take and put this up here and change that to app. There we go. So now if we go back to widgets, well, this works because we're still logged in, but if I log out, well, I've got a problem now. I can't even get to the home page. So what's kind of cool, one of the things you can do in Buffalo is you can say, you can get the middleware and you can skip pieces of middleware. So in this case, I want to skip the authorize for the home handler. And now I can see that page. But I still can't log in because I can't get to /auth GitHub. Now there are a couple ways we could try to solve this, but the easiest way is to use the skip middleware again. We do have one slight problem. Because the Goth begin auth handler isn't a Buffalo handler, we've had to wrap it, which means that every time we'd call this wrap function, we get a different function back. So the way to solve this here is I'm just going to, grab this here and assign this to a variable. That way I can use the same, have access to the same function every time. And then on my authorization middleware here, I can skip authorize with the begin authorization handler and the auth callback handler here. Just so you can see this better, I'm just going to split these up. And I'm not too concerned about the auth destroy because in theory you should be logged in anyway to get to the auth destroy. So if I go to my application here, if I try to sign in, you see that now works. So there we go, I can sign in, I can sign out, everything works. Another option, so if I remove this here, if I try to sign in, you can see it doesn't work, is I could, in the middleware stack, replace authorize with a kind of no-op piece of middleware, like such. You see that works. But that's just a bit dirtier. I don't like that. I'd much rather use skip. Now it's important that you put it on the group, which is the auth group here, and not kind of at the app level, because these endpoints, or these callbacks, are on the group. They're not at the app level, right? So a group is an app, but it's a sub app. It's kind of a whole thing. So understand that I had to put these on auth and not app. If I were to put this here, that wouldn't work. It wouldn't know, because those middleware are, the endpoints are actually mounted somewhere else. Okay, so now I want to take my widgets and I want to expose those to the world. So I want people to be able to see the list and the show for the widgets resource, but nothing else. So the first thing I'm going to do, again, like I did with the begin auth handler, is I'm going to take my widgets resource, put it into a variable so I have access to it. Now I'm going to get the group. So when I do an app.resource, it's actually going to return a Buffalo application to me, just like app.group did. So again, on this here, I can grab the middleware stack and I can say skip authorize for the list and the show. So if I go back, to my application here, I am logged in, or rather, let me log out here. There we go. And if I go to widgets, I can see the widgets list, but if I go to create widget, I get an error. It's sending me back to the home page because I'm not authorized. But if I sign in, here we go, and I go to widgets and I click new widget, my awesome widget. There we go. Okay, fantastic. And I'm just gonna hold on to that URL real quick to make sure that if I log out, I can still get to that page, and I can. Now obviously there's work to do in this application, kind of getting rid of some of these buttons here to only show if you're logged in or logged out or not, but that's kind of out of scope of this little recipe application here. This is again just showing you kind of a little bit about authentication as well as using middleware in Buffalo. So it's a really great kind of step for a lot of things here. So our application, our app.go file isn't all that big, but it's kind of cool. We set up the entire application to use authorize. Now we probably didn't need to. That's probably overkill for this application. In fact, it probably would have been better and easier if we just, on the widgets resource, the thing we actually want to authorize, we just add that piece of middleware. But as we add more resources, it's nice to know that they're all kind of covered. So everything is authorized except for the things we say not to authorize, which in this case we can use the skip functionality to skip the home handler so we can get to our home page. And then we're going to skip the login methods. And then we're going to skip two things that we want to, as part of the widgets resource that we want to show. But everything else is going to be completely locked down unless we want to expose it. We also kind of using the auth. We used Goth here to talk to GitHub, get the authorization, come back. We query the database, and if the user exists, we're gonna just use that. Otherwise, we're gonna create a new user. We're gonna set the current user ID into the session. Making sure to save the session and then redirect them. To destroy the session, to remove the session, we're just gonna clear it. And log them out. Then we got two pieces of middleware. The first being set current user, and all this does is if there's a current user ID in the session, get it, find it from the database, stick it in the context. That's it. Makes it available now on every single page. And then the authorized middleware, which is going to actually redirect us if the person is not authorized. So that's it. It's a pretty simple little application, but it's actually going to demonstrate quite a lot here. So that's it. That's my little recipe for using Goth and middleware to do authorization of a Buffalo application. So that's it for now. I hope this helped. This video was brought to you by Gopher Guides. If you're an organization, conference, or user group that is looking for Go training, please visit gopherguides.com. All training is custom designed to match your educational needs.